We're gonna look at the crazy training of the '90s Chicago Bulls, one of the most dominant dynasties in all of professional sports. And we're gonna start right now. All right, so when we're looking at this, I want to set this context, okay? If we see this team won 6 world titles, and their strength coach was Al Vermeil, okay? So Al Vermeil, uniquely, was a big weightlifting guy, big fan of weightlifting, and he would actually talk about triple flexion. I was fortunate enough a couple times I've seen him speak. I've been around Mike Gattone, who used to work with Al Vermeil coaching the Chicago Bulls. And Vermeil also was the strength coach for the Chicago Bears when they won the world title in the late 80s. So he was like sort of like I would say like the godfather of strength and conditioning, like one of the first big time guys in strength and conditioning. And the interesting part is that Al would talk about triple flexion. So he would talk about being able to catch and being in these positions of flexion is more important than triple extension. And I would assume by now, everybody knows that I'm a pretty die-hard weightlifting guy. I'm a big fan of weightlifting exercises like power snatches, full snatches, things like that, behind the neck jerks, cleans. We use them, and we don't use them. In certain programs, we don't use them, but in a lot of programs, we use them, especially if you're inside of peak strength and you're using our basketball program. We will use versions of weightlifting exercises that are all sort of triggered by these conversations with Al Vermeil and what I've heard him say. But the interesting part is that if you've been following our channels, I've never really talked about triple extension. A lot of people will talk about that. I don't really think it's a thing that we need to hammer home on, right? The interesting thing here is that Al talks quite a bit about triple flexion and catching with hip flexion, catching a knee flexion, catching with dorsiflexion in the ankles, and how important that is for sports, because that's typically where you're playing most of the game, especially in something like basketball. And that shin angle change, things like that, that leads to high performance. So I'm gonna go over what Al speaks about here, but then I also wanna go into the fact that Michael Jordan wouldn't train with Al. Michael Jordan did his own training. He did his own style of work, and some of the stuff, Pippen, Horace Grant, BJ Armstrong, Paxson, all those guys would train with Mike and train with Al Vermeil while Michael would do his own thing. And a lot of that was because Michael's so competitive. He wanted to do something different where he felt like he would have an even greater edge. So that does have to be said. So let's check out what Al has to say about their strength training for the Chicago Bulls, and then let's get even deeper into what Michael Jordan did.
For 48 minutes.
All right.
You know straight off they're among the best conditioned athletes in the world.
Best conditioned athletes in the world.
Realize is exactly how they get that way. Bulls practice headquarters, the Deerfield Multiplex, where Phil Jackson puts his team
Deerfield
through drills each
Multiplex.
day.
That Pippen, do that old school vertical leg press. What's crazy is like
practice umbrella, and one of the most critical is weight training.
It's good for us to be able to come here during this season and keep ourselves going up, and that way during the playoff you're able to, you know, take a lot of the banging and stay away.
Stay strong throughout the season so you get to the playoffs and you can handle the banging.
idea for these athletes
It's
is
crazy
not
that
to
a
line
lot
up
of
with a
guys
body
today
by
still
Schwarzenegger,
don't do this
but
stuff.
to stabilize their physical condition for the grind of an 82-game schedule and beyond.
You can keep a player consistent towards the end of the season when the other players are becoming fatigued. The ones who don't train, I'm speaking about, the ones who don't train become fatigued. Little things start to hurt. Their strength levels from that fatigue and from the cumulative stresses of the season.
So basically it's the accumulation of stress throughout the season. They start to break down more. They don't perform at higher degrees the last 20 to 25 games in the season. You know, especially in a sport like basketball, when you're playing on hardwood, there's a lot of jumping, there's a lot of banging, as Pippen says. Dude, look at how jacked his arms are. Sweet hat, by the way. Where do we find a hat like that?
Though, and Bulls coaches consider game day lifting very important.
Game day
Do
lifting.
something in the morning of the game. That evening, it's easier to get going. If you've ever participated in athletics, and I remember as a college football player, we'd sit in that hotel room all day. By the time you go to the stadium, you have to shake yourself to wake up. That if you do a workout in the morning, brief, intense, it does help prepare you. Actually, there's some indication that after
These dudes just like gliding everywhere. And I think what
I spent a lot of time working with Al and Eric, and you know they put a lot of time in helping me to develop some upper body and leg strength.
Are they tough guys to work with?
Yeah, they are tough. I mean, they really get after us, and you know they expect us to come in.
bench press, look how long his arms are too. What does he got? 205, 225 there? That's wild. But think about this. You know, you got Pippen, who's one of the greatest of all time, giving you the little flex. And Al's talking about game day lifting in the morning, getting that little lift in. What's interesting is even in sports like, he mentions college football, waking it up a little bit. Sports like throwing, people will lift the morning of a comp just to wake up a little. And the lift doesn't have to be what you're envisioning, this crazy, crazy intense exercise. It can just be get in and hit it a little bit.
Came back a lot stronger and more physically prepared. His knees not bothering him. And then we had the usual group of Horace Grant, Will Perdue, Bill Cartwright, John Paxson, B.J. Armstrong, Scottie Pippen. All those guys just worked real hard. And I think a real example is B.J. He's up about 12 pounds. He felt he needed to get stronger and gain the weight.
Think about that. B.J. Armstrong gaining 12 pounds.
And this is part of your preparation process that you have to go through. Getting yourself strong, getting your endurance. This is a marathon of a season for us, so you have to go out there and get ready.
So last year you felt you needed this, obviously coming into this year.
Well, I mean, you go through 8-9 months of grinding and practicing and getting banged up, so any way you can give yourself an advantage, I think will help. And last year I felt this really helped me out, and I really took it on this summer, and I think it's really going to help me out this year.
Some of these guys, for their size, move a tremendous amount of weight. If you think Horace Grant cleaned, which is taking the bar off the floor, and pulling it all the way up to here. He did 300 pounds at 6'10".
So Horace Grant, 6'10", power cleans 300 pounds.
If you look at the amount of weight in the
6'10",
the distance,
300 pounds.
Now, Michael Jordan, does he partake?
No, I don't.
Do you wish he would?
Yeah, I'd like to have Michael. I mean, I think I'd be foolish to say you wouldn't want to be a player in the team. Michael has chosen not to, and that's his choice. And obviously, the guy's been very successful long before Al Vermeil was around. So, I'm certainly not one to criticize, but I'd like to have the opportunity to work with Michael.
What do you think it would do for him?
I hate to deal in maybes, but I think anybody, whether it be Michael, and I think Bill Cartwright's a classic example, I think it will help extend your career over a longer period of time.
Mm-hmm. So he's saying, right there, he's saying that the lifting, especially with the Bulls guys, Cartwright, Horace Grant, their career will get extended over a very long period of time. And I remember, if I remember this correctly, I think it was Horace Grant who had a younger brother, and he didn't last as long in the league. And Horace would say how his brother was a better baller than him, but he didn't want to do the work in the weight room, and his career was much shorter. And when you're as big as they are, 6'8", 6'9", 6'10", you've got to have that strength to handle to stabilize your joints, so you have that structural integrity to take on. It's an 82-game season. That's a freaking long season. That's incredible. And what is it starting? October, November, and then leads all the way through June. That's a really, really long time. So now we're going to check out what Michael was doing. And I think you could see there from Al, he's like, look, I wish Michael would want to come in and lift with us, but he does his own thing. And I applaud him. He still is one of the greatest of all time. And I think that one of the other final things here is Al, this is back in the 90s, mid to late 90s, was even talking about how you'd have guys come in, their knees are banged up or their knee hurts, and if we can strengthen certain areas, all of a sudden their knee doesn't hurt anymore. And it's the early calling of mobility and the early calling of strength was really, really starting to snowball and start to take effect. And I think that we could still, to this day, take notes from what they were doing when they had technology that was not as effective as what we have today.
Well, there was a small article in the newspaper.
Yeah, so Tim Grover, if I remember
Michael
correctly,
was tired
Grover
of taking
does
the
work
physical
with
abuse
LeBron James as
the
well.
Detroit Pistons and wanted to start a strength and conditioning program, but he was afraid to lift any weights because he didn't know what the effects were going to be on his game. And I actually contacted the team physician and the athletic trainer at that time. Met with both of them.
Larry
to explain
Benjamin
my
at 175.
philosophies,
Look at how
and
long
they
he is,
introduced
dude.
me to Michael. And Michael said, we'll try it out for 30 days, and 30 days turned into 15 years. Michael's mindset into training was extremely unique. I mean, the most competitive individual I've ever met. Never wanted to lose at anything. Always felt like somebody else was going to outwork him, so he wanted to outwork them.
I think this is something too, what he's saying here, it's something that we're talking about this in our own company. It's like, if you can take every single thing that you do and think about doing it to the absolute freaking best as you can do. You want to be the world champion at making a YouTube video. Like, that's the attitude Michael Jordan had.
How many championships, how many titles, what people said, how many accolades he got, he always wanted to get better. Most practices have the starting 5 on the same team. Practices where Michael's at, they always had Scotty on the other team because Michael wanted to go against the best defender and the best player or the second best player on the team. He never played down to the level of his competition. He always found a way to motivate himself. If he knew in a certain game that he could score real easily, he'd say, well, I'm going to go get some more rebounds, I'm going to go get assists. He had
like a game inside of a game.
And so he did whatever the team needed to win. I think the key components to that mindset is once he stepped between those lines, nothing else mattered. That was his safe haven. Nobody could get to him. He was able to perform in front of millions of people, and he never wanted to let them down, but he practiced extremely hard.
And behind the neck press here, this is like a Mike O'Hearn special, 115, just wrapping that out, getting that good strength in the shoulders, good mobility. And today, if you would post a video doing that, you'd have 1 million people comment, oh, that's bad for your shoulders. Meanwhile, Bill Pearl was doing this back in the 50s with 315, and we've got guys, Michael Jordan, greatest of all time, doing behind the neck presses.
Preparing for a basketball game than just the dribbling, shooting part of it. There's knowing what the weakness and strengths of your opponent is, what the opposing team is, what your players are capable of doing, what they're not capable of doing, what you can do to enhance their abilities. It's a job. Okay? It's a job just like every other one, and the more you're prepared for it, the better you will be at it. But preparation takes hard work, and it takes sacrifice that you have to do.
So I think the big lesson here is, one, you want to be the best, you've got to look at what are every facets of your game or of your sport or of your skill, right? What are you trying to do in life? What is every single phase of that you can get better at? 2, if we're talking about sports performance, basketball, volleyball, to swimming, to football, to wrestling, to throwing, to cross country, to running the marathon, you need to do some type of resistance-based training. You need to develop some type of lean muscle mass, and then you also have to figure out how is that being applied into the sport. Okay, that's the big factor here. That's exactly what we're doing inside of our programming for you guys. So you can take that resistance-based training, you can go to peakstrength.app, the Google Play Store or the Apple iOS Store. You can download Peak Strength, you can click on basketball. I want to train for basketball. I want to do this resistance-based training. I want to get stronger. I want to get more explosive. I want to jump a little bit better. I want to be able to handle the absorption of force. I want to be potentially in that triple flexion, as I mentioned from Al, and become a champion in all facets of your sport. Because remember, freaks, if you want to become a champion, you've always got to cultivate your power. Peace.